Thank you for viewing this presentation. I hope that together we can tackle some of the challenges we art teachers face in the classroom and also as we approach the upcoming school year. During the last year, which was during the pandemic, we have faced a known villain that changed education as we have known it. And now together we are navigating the art education ship through these new and different times in which we live and teach. I want to compliment art teachers all over the country because in true creative form, we rose above the challenges and charted a new kind of art education during hybrid and remote teaching. On this slide, you'll see one of those infamous art history recreations from the pandemic. It was shared in OATK12, a recreation of Van Gogh's Starry Night painting. Working with material normally found around the home, art education adapted swiftly and quickly during this past year, which was the 2020-2021 school year, if you are viewing this in future years, to ask our students to think in more unique ways about making art from home. And we as teachers had to think in more innovative, inventive ways. Now we teachers are being asked to think again and ponder what a year of school that's coming up that we hope will be mostly pandemic. What will that year look like? Today, we're going to be pretty philosophical in this session. We're going to discuss this as it pertains to our students, not just for this upcoming school year, but also as we go forward and have conversations about reshaping art education for this new world we find ourselves living in and working in. I'm Dr. Trina Harlow from the University of Central Arkansas and the founder of Online Art Teachers K-12, or OATK12 as we like to say. I'm also just beginning a national board position with the National Art Education Association, of which I hope you are all members. So I look forward to continuing to serve art education in a variety of ways. Again, thank you for viewing this presentation as I share some of my own thoughts on how we can motivate our students. Some unknowns are present. This upcoming school year is going to be another interesting year, I think. But as educators, we do have many knowns. Planning and really thinking about what the upcoming school year might be like are going to be key. Let me say that again. Planning and really thinking about what the upcoming school year is going to be like is really going to be key. And the upcoming year might be full of shifts and changes, as last school year was. We really don't know. But things are definitely looking much better since vaccinations happened for COVID. So let's think about Shakespeare for a minute. Shakespeare said, "All things are ready if our mind be so." I want to say that again too. Shakespeare said, "All things are ready if our mind be so." And so we as teachers shall get our minds ready. In my university art education program, the College of Education has asked us to begin including in-person, hybrid, and remote field experiences for our students as a normal part of our programs going forward. And so we are discussing ways in which to do so right now. No matter what our teaching modality, one thing is certain: motivation needs to be a part of the discussion. How can we expect students who did not pay attention in class with us right there to watch over them to be self-motivated from their place of residence while staring at a device? Our planning going forward must be not what we want. It must be what our students need. Our planning for fall must not be what we as teachers want. It must be what our students need, the students of a new world order in education, or potential new and needed education, so to speak. So let's talk about two things: intrinsic motivation and self-efficacy. Intrinsic motivation means that students naturally have motivation that it comes from inside them. The opposite of this is extrinsic motivation, which is things like grades, rewards, awards for accomplishments, etc. And self-efficacy. Students with self-efficacy are able to get things done more so on their own, or at least can attempt to guide their learning and stay more on task with expectations. But many students do not have these skills. How do we teach them? Let's get one more definition in our minds before continuing. That of motivation. The definition of motivation is the reason or reasons one has for acting or behaving in a particular way, the general desire or willingness of someone to do something. What motivates our students? Let's think about that for a minute. As teachers, we know we must begin with the end in mind, correct? This was a focus part of one of my master's degree courses at Boston University. Beginning with the end in mind, backwards design, it's called a few different things, but essentially it means that we must know what the goal is before we can teach it. Let me use a simple analogy. Now don't laugh, I'm going to use a really simple analogy. Let's say that I wanted to drive across the town where I live, which is now a suburb of Dallas, Texas. I want to go to the grocery store, and it's just 5 minutes from my house. I get in my car, and I have less than a quarter of a tank of gas. Is that okay? Sure it is. It's plenty to get me to where I want to go for this short excursion. But let's say I want to go to the south side of Dallas to visit my son, and my car is under a quarter tank of gas. Is that enough? No. So therefore, I have to make plans to either gas up in my town or hope I find an exit in downtown Dallas where I can pull off and get gas without too much trouble. In planning this trip, I know that I want to walk in the door of my son's house in Waco in about 2 hours and that I don't want to run out of gas on the way. And I know there are not too many easy to stop at places along the interstate. So I decide to prepare now and gas up in my town before heading south through downtown Dallas and on south of Dallas. The goal is to get to my son's house and play with my grandkids. Okay, this is a simple example, but this is planning with the end in mind. This is what we need to do as art teachers, not just plan what we are going to study, not just plan that we're going to do a unit on Kehinde Wiley with our students, but really plan what we are going to learn about him and his work and his life and how we will apply that knowledge to our own lives, to current events. How will we address holistic education, effect theory, the whole child approaches, and social justice, EDI, and belonging? How will we achieve all of the plans we want for this unit on Kehinde Wiley? And how will we motivate our students to learn this valuable knowledge that we know is so important for them to know? So to continue to examine this discussion, we are going to examine motivation a little more fully. In what ways can we provide motivation within our art programs? Read this list and think about it for just a few seconds. Some of these are intrinsic motivation, and some of these are extrinsic. And some more things to think about. And these are all extrinsic. Before we transition into discussing the thinking learner, let me say that again. We're going to discuss the thinking learner. Let's take a look at some research on motivation. Former U.S. Secretary of Education Bell reminds us that focus on motivation is paramount for teachers. Sir Ken Robinson, who we all in art education deeply respect, reminded us that farmers and gardeners don't just look at a plant and say, dang it, grow. They don't say that. Instead, they say, take care of it, fertilize it, water it, and so on. Ferlazzo contends that we need to focus on intrinsic motivation, not extrinsic, and he provides evidence for this. He further states that while extrinsic motivation might be good to help achieve short-term goals for the here and now. In the long run, it is actually a deterrent to advancing creative and higher order thinking. And he states that it tends to diminish intrinsic motivation for the long term. He cites a study of 200,000 people that found that intrinsically motivated people are 3 times more engaged in their work than those who focus on external rewards. He does contend that sometimes carrots are needed and sometimes sticks. It is just important for teachers to know which and when. Daniel Pink discusses that people need baseline rewards, basic and fair compensation, so that we will have motivation to do something. In school, this could be something like a caring teacher or a clean classroom or engaging lessons. Extrinsic motivators have a place in education, but as teachers, we must know how to use them, not overuse them, and not depend on them. Verlazo also presents research on 4 elements that combine to nurture intrinsic motivation. Those are autonomy, or having some control over what needs to happen and how it's done. The second one is competence, which is when a student has a feeling that they have the ability to be successful in doing a particular endeavor. And the third is relatedness, which means doing the activity helps them feel connected to others and that people they respect care about them. Or maybe we should say they respect the people who care about them. And the fourth is relevance, which means the work students do must be interesting and valuable to them, and they must find it useful in their present lives and also their hopes and dreams for the future. Verlazo also contends that thinking routines, such as one developed by Project Zero at Harvard, should be used regularly, where the teacher asks, "What's going on here?" And after a student responds by saying, "What's going on?" the teacher then says, "What do you see that makes you say so?" What does this remind you art educators of? It reminds me exactly of visual thinking strategies, or VTS as we call it. Regarding self-determination theory, I'd like to ask you to go to a website called www.selfdeterminationtheory.org and read about this influential model that offers a framework for understanding the factors that promote human motivation and flourishing. Decky and Ryan developed this theory. Self-determination theory is the theory of human motivation and personality, which suggests that people are able to become self-determined when their needs for competence, relatedness, and autonomy are fulfilled. Hussman and Lenz research on future time perspective, and they contend that motivation is directly related to how far into the future that people plan, how they perceive their own future needs, and how they think the present is connected to the future. In art, that means students need to understand why it's important to learn what they're learning, not just to learn it, but why is it important to know it? And sometimes maybe we don't always cover that. In Art Ed Journal, some 40 years ago, Stir discusses the differences in motivation between the elementary art student and the high school art student. He contends that we need to offer much more than extrinsic motivation to the high school art student. We need to discuss topics abstractly and philosophically with them, treat them like adults, push their reason, not just expect the achievement of goals to check off a list and make their grades. He also reminds us that most elementary students just love coming to art and they get excited about it, and we don't even have to do too much to motivate them. But somewhere along about the time of adolescence and middle school, students start losing some of that motivation they have for art. Not all, but some. He asks us to take the way in which we facilitate art critiques. Just think about that a minute. Think about all the things you do when you're leading a really good art critique. And he wants us to apply that same kind of planning and logic to other areas of reasoning that happen in the art classroom. In the book Art for Art's Sake, Winner et al. Look at the empirical knowledge about the impact of art education on non-art academic subjects such as math, science, reading, writing. These researchers contend that artists are role models for innovation in our societies, helping us critically innovate, develop creative and critical thinking, helping develop motivation, self-confidence, communication skills, and cooperative and collaborative skills. They're preaching to the choir here, folks, because we're art teachers and we know those things. But the nice thing about knowing those things as art teachers is we can back it up with research. And we need to be able to espouse some of this research when we're sitting in staff meetings or meetings with our administrators or my own research has fully demonstrated how we can increase motivation in and through the visual arts. At the end of the research day, I firmly believe the most important factor in motivation, even though we have all this wonderful, usable, important research out there, is the relationship between the teacher and the student and how a teacher can break through those walls that students put up for various reasons. Years ago, I had a high school student who was squarely situated within a gang. Everyone knew it, and I felt like many students, even teachers, were almost scared of him. Everyone seemed to stay away from him. I was not. Instead, I made it my goal to help him feel comfortable in my classroom, as I knew that was the first step in helping him have any motivation whatsoever in my theater class. I won't go into all the detail because of time, but I will tell you the steps were not rocket science, but were very purposeful and methodical. I smiled and spoke to him when most did not. I treated him with respect. I began using a lot of collaborative groups in my class, actually more than ever, because I wanted him to start feeling a part of the classroom community. And I wanted other students to see the goodness in him. And I could tell that would not happen with him sitting on the back row with his head covered, looking down for 100% of class while tapping his feet the entire time. While everyone else saw a tough guy, I saw a kid who felt like a fish out of water. Long story short, these collaborative groups worked. It took about 2 months or so, but he began to be much more comfortable in the classroom, and the other students began talking to him and sitting by him. One day, I was standing in the hallway between periods, and I nearly fainted when he made eye contact with me as he walked in the classroom, nodded his head, and said, "Miss," to me as he walked in my classroom. This was the first time he had spoken to me in about 2 months. And the truth is, it was not even that hard to accomplish this. It just took purposeful planning on my part. From then on, he was obviously motivated in my class and even took the lead in building some huge plywood trees I had to build for an upcoming musical. On the last day of school, I asked him to come by my office, which was attached to the theater room, and I gave him a copy of a book called The 10 Habits of Highly Successful People. I had written a note in it for him, but I asked him if he would promise me that he would read the whole book and that I wasn't going to give it to him unless he could make me that promise. He was stunned. He said he would read every word and that I had his word, and I gave him the book and told him I was so proud of him. I'm not sure what happened to this student. It's a big metropolitan area, but one thing I am sure of is if research is correct, he had one person in his life, a teacher, that genuinely cared about him, and that is supposed to be what a young person needs to be successful in life. In my mind, I dream it that he builds houses or something along those lines. I don't know where he is or what he does, but I do know one thing. I cared about him, and that motivated him. Motivation is massively important. Research and common sense both substantiate this. We have known in education for quite some time that we have been too dependent on standardized learning and test taking. We have not been creating thinkers. I think that we in art education really have a unique understanding of this because we see amazing learning that happens that is not assessed on standardized testing. However, I do contend that in art education, we have been creating doers and memorizers as much of the rest of education has. I have found most of my own university students these last 7 years want to know exactly what they need to do, and they want to be able to check off expectations to make the grade they want to make. I suppose in grad school, I did the same thing. I know professors, however, not me, but colleagues who do not enter grades the whole semester. And I know colleagues that believe that no one does A work. For many of us, for many of our students, grades are important. And sometimes we may even feel like they might be the one good motivating strategy that we have. And it is. Today, we are just discussing all of this out loud. How can we broaden our thoughts as teachers? How do we broaden our expectations as teachers? How do we as teachers increase motivation? My hope is that pandemic teaching has helped us place focus on the fact that we need to be growing thinking learners in our schools, in our students, not test takers. We need to create thinkers, students that can shift instructional modalities within one day and learning continues, because that is what is good for the human race that is trying to occupy this shrinking and changing planet. It may not be easy to do, and it may take time, but I am convinced that we can achieve this step by step, Zoom by Zoom, supply packet by supply packet, or improving our in-person modalities. I want to share this thought by this child on the screen. It's always important to know what our students think. How can we help them become thinkers if we don't know what they think? And I love what this little boy named Ben wrote on March 16th of 2020. It is not going good. My mom's getting stressed out. My mom is really getting confused. We took a break so my mom can figure this stuff out. And I'm telling you, it is not going good. That's what that student thinks. We need to take a look and really dig in to our students' minds and what they think in order to motivate them. Let's dig in and discuss some qualities or key characteristics of the thinking learner. I have identified 5 key characteristics. They are excited to learn. They cannot wait to see what the teacher has planned for them. Lessons created by teachers do not have to be highly detailed, but do need to set up prompts for the learner as jumping off points for which and where they can begin, set parameters, but let them guide their learning. When we plan our instruction so that students can just check off a list of things to do, we are not creating thinking learners. They are excited by motivation. They eagerly take instruction and turn it into goal setting. They need motivation at school, but they need even more motivation if learning from their place of residence, such as in hybrid or remote learning. We have to get past our minds and our pre-virus way of doing things and re-examine the research and reorganize how we teach intrinsic motivation and how we use extrinsic motivation. They are excited to problem solve. The thinking learner is excited to problem solve. They're not just checking off a list. They want to solve a problem. They are eager to personalize their response to instruction, working through the overarching problem. The struggle becomes a part of their journey, and the process of thinking and learning becomes something they are learning how to do. They are excited to create. They are excited about both creating and then sharing their efforts. Give them opportunities to share. My own research demonstrates that when students are asked to share their work in online classroom spaces where their peers see their work, such as using discussion boards in our learning management systems as online art galleries, they tend to contribute more effort when you, the teacher, are the only one seeing it. During in-person learning, don't forget to give plenty of small group opportunities to share work, as this is when more dialogue happens, when more thinking happens, and it's more comfortable for many students to speak and think in small groups rather than to the whole class. They are excited about their process and progress. The thinking learner gets excited about what they're doing and their final product. Their focused efforts lead to self-satisfaction, revealing to our students that they can accomplish more as thinking learners and also gain more pride and satisfaction in this. How can we create thinking learners in education? Some ways include by incorporating visual thinking strategies, or VTS as we call it. You can do an internet search and read all about this if you're not familiar with it. Go to vts.org and read and view their ideas and theories. By engaging in genuine intellectual activity, problem solving, considering choices, making decisions, using new and unusual art, media, and skills, and incorporating important themes into our work that promote things that students are interested in the present that they think affect their futures, like social emotional learning, social justice, EDI and belonging, biography-driven instruction, biopsychosocial learning, culturally relevant, culturally sustaining, culturally reverent learning and teaching, and the ever needed personal growth in all of these areas. By re-examining the Bloom's revised taxonomy and reminding ourselves as teachers if we are using these important pillars of knowledge building. By specifically planning for time for critical thinking. I believe critical thinking cannot be rushed, just like a good art project cannot be rushed. So time, allowing for enough time, is vital to growing thinking learners. The goal should not be how many projects that cover every known type of art and media during the school year. The goal should be units that progress with enough time for learning and growth in our field of art education to take place. Finally, allow the struggle. That is how we learn. I teach every semester of my art ed students that if our students already know something, why are we teaching it? Planning should involve things they don't know, and through constructivist teaching, we can partner with our students to grow that knowledge. We can always know more. Also, I teach my pre-service students to not run over and immediately help a struggling learner, to let them struggle some. That is a true step in thinking, problem solving, and ultimately learning. Today's session has been pretty philosophical, but I think as art educators, it's good to sit back and pause, especially when we have time, such as during school breaks or after a day of school, when we are finally sitting in a totally quiet room after an amazing day at our desk or computer, and we're pondering, how did I help students today? How did the art projects we made today go? But also, let's start thinking, how did I help students think in my art classes today? As art teachers, we know without a shadow of a doubt that the skills that students learn in and through the visual arts are real tools and skills to help them with every other aspect of life.